And within a few weeks, we got a couple of messages from people. I remember one in particular, it was an elderly couple in their late 70s, and this woman wrote to tell us that she had been at the grocery store. Her husband went to pick up his bacon, loved his bacon, picked it up and put it back down. So I get upset. That gets me emotional. But he put it back down, and his response was, she noticed, but she looked at him, and he said, Esther, right? That was his, That was it, At that point in their life, I don't think they owed anybody anything, right? And to let her have that kind of an impact on somebody like that without saying a word is how we knew that it was the right approach for us.
Welcome to Plant the Change. I'm Michelle Fosnot, founder of Solid Rock, Florida, an innovative nonprofit that includes Solid Rock Community School, providing K-12 education, and the Sanctuary at Solid Rock, offering lifelong care for animals in need. We're a forward-thinking, eco-advanced organization dedicated to compassionate, humane education. Hello, friends. Today we have a special guest who embodies the Solid Rock core values of compassion and kindness. Steve Jenkins, also known as Esther the Wonder Pig's dad, has made significant contributions to animal welfare and has transformed how we view humane treatment in animals. I've been following Esther the Wonder Pig for 10 years on social media. Their life together was literally part of the Solid Rock Compassion Project that we show in our morning show. His treatment of Esther literally had a profound effect on my personal life, and I woke up every morning and couldn't wait to take a look at their social media posts. Welcome, Steve, to Plant the Change.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
So, Steve, let's start by you telling everyone the story of how you met Esther.
Absolutely. So it was back in 2012. I got a message on Facebook randomly from a girlfriend that I went to school with that I hadn't seen for years and years and years, that remembered that I was an animal lover. I'd always been, that kind of person. I was always all about animals. And so anyway, she reached out with this random message to tell me that she had a mini pig that wasn't fitting in with her home. So she had just had twins and she had a couple of dogs, and this little pig was causing chaos at her house, apparently. And, I had always heard about pigs as pets, little pot-bellied pigs. And I think George Clooney had one at the time that people were talking about. I'd seen it in People magazine or wherever. And so, of course, I was immediately interested in the idea, but I knew nothing about pigs. So I did a little bit of research. I told her I would get back to her. I hadn't talked to my partner, Derek, about it at the time. And only a few hours went by from that first message and me writing her back that she sent me another message that said, somebody else is interested, but I know, I spoke to you first, but I need to know whether you want her or not. And I panicked in that couple of hours. I'd become very invested in the idea of having a pet pig. And so I agreed to meet her the following morning. So I made this big plan to meet her at my office. I was a real estate agent at the time, and Derek was off doing magic shows that day. So I arranged to meet her at my office, and I was supposed to be leaving that day to go to a Highland Games. I also played the bagpipes. And so I was heading up to a Highland Games, and I'd created this whole story that I was going to, find this pig on my way home from the Highland Games and bring her home. And I had no choice, Derek. She was on the side of the road. That was kind of my plan. But I went and met this girl at my office, and as soon as she pulled, unnamed pig at the time, as soon as she pulled little Esther out of this cat carrier, no, it was a laundry basket, actually.
Wait, and you just said little Esther.
Literally, like she would have fit in a shoebox. She was tiny. And so she pulled her out of this laundry basket, and she had like this ratty cat collar on her and like chipped nail polish on her hooves. And the thought of me taking her up to the Highland Games and sticking her in a hotel for the whole weekend and, coming home, I just couldn't do it. So I ended up going right home that day. I waited till Derek was done his magic shows and introduced him. And it was actually the dogs that gave her away. I had her hiding up the other end of the house in my office, and I had, was going to make dinner and had wine and, trying to kind of, wine and dine and set the stage. And as soon as Derek came in, he noticed the house was spotless. Like I'd done all the right things, but it wasn't normal. And so his interest was piqued, and he noticed both of the dogs. We had Shelby and Reuben at the time. So they were laying outside the office on the floor with their snouts to the door. And yeah, Derek went right down the hallway, and it was like one of those kind of comedy of errors. Like he came in the door, and rather than coming to see me in the kitchen, he went left immediately, and I knew where he was going. And I followed him down the hallway and he opened the door and there was little Esther in the bedroom. And so not super happy. He wasn't super happy at first, but within a few days, once you got to know her, the minute I met her, well, like I said, I fell in love with her immediately. And the minute that you kind of got to know her, you couldn't help but fall in love with her. And Derek was just as smitten as I was. And, the rest was history. And now again, she was...
I got to ask though, did you tell him the truth of how you came to her, or did you tell him the story of you found her on the side of the road?
He I think it was a little while before he heard that full story. It might have actually been a couple of years before I actually
So you
told
actually said you found her on the side of the road?
the whole story. I stuck with it. Yeah, I stuck with it for a while because I didn't have a choice. I had to get her. I was like, oh, I have to get her, Derek. We had no choice. What am I supposed to do? That was part of it all. I had a history. I had actually brought home a kitten a few years previous to that I found in a barn, and she was the runt of the litter, and he was not too happy with me bringing her home. Not that the animals were the problem, it's that I didn't ask, right? We didn't discuss. It was one of those big kind of family decisions that we should have all been part of. And so I knew that there was probably going to be hesitation. And I mean, even potbelly pigs or mini pigs, as people like to say, which we can talk about later. That's a whole different subject.
Definitely want to.
So, even mini pigs, get up to about 250 pounds, right? So, I mean, they are quite large. I knew it was a big commitment. So I needed to get creative in order to, get her in the house. So that's what I did.
Hi, friends. Your support can help make the difference by liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing the Plant the Change podcast. You can also visit us at solidrockflorida.org to learn more about Solid Rock Community School and the Sanctuary at Solid Rock. Your support makes a real impact, and it helps plant the change. So Esther has sadly passed away, but her legacy still lives on. Can you tell us what you're doing?
There's a couple things in the works. I mean, for one, as a lot of people do know, back in 2014, we moved to Campbellville and opened a sanctuary, Happily Ever Esther Farm Sanctuary. So the sanctuary still exists, still operating, but they're moving to another property so that they can expand and rescue more animals, have a little bit more space. So what I'm planning to do with Esther's current farm, the farm that we started on, is open actually an agritourism business that will preserve the property and the history of the property, but all of the proceeds from the agritourism business will be donated to animal sanctuaries and animal rescues. So one of the things that we learned once we got into this world, again, knew nothing about sanctuaries. I didn't even know farm sanctuaries were a thing until Esther came into our life, and there was a point that I have to admit we were not sure that we were going to be able to keep her, whether or not we could make it work. A part of Esther's story is the fact that she was in fact not a mini pig and was a full-size commercial pig. So this pig that was supposed to be 70 pounds ended up being 450 within a relatively short amount of time, about a year and a half. We had to start looking at options. That's when we learned sanctuaries existed, but we also learned that they were struggling for funds, that they didn't have space to take other animals. And initially that's what prompted us to create our own sanctuary. That problem that sanctuaries are dealing with funding and having exposure and people knowing that they even exist is still a very real problem. And so that's where I've turned my attention to now, is trying to create this organization that will help, like I said, preserve the history of the property and also serve as a means for us to help kind of promote and support the existing sanctuaries.
I love that so much because not only are you continuing Esther's legacy, but you're helping others. And I think that is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I do want to go back to what you said about the micro pig or the mini pig. Let's just talk about that for a second, because I think that is so important.
Yeah.
Because first of all, we need sanctuaries. They
100%.
they have to exist. And many people don't know that they exist.
Yep.
They go to pet stores and different venues to look at animals. Yeah. And we always want to talk to people about this, so they will instead go to rescues and sanctuaries, right? And I know that you're a believer in that too. Adopt, don't shop.
Yep.
So we want them to go to the sanctuaries and go to the rescues. Number one, because if they really do want to bring an animal into their home, these are animals that need homes. So let's go here.
Yes.
But number two, they can get a lot of education and they can learn the right ways to take care of animals, because so many people get animals that they are not equipped to take care of. That is why sanctuaries exist.
100%.
Because just like your scenario, you got a mini pig. You said this pig, right? And then Esther was how much weight at her highest weight?
At her heaviest, she was about 650 pounds. And
Wow.
so slightly above the 70 that we were expecting. You know, she was about 3.5 feet tall at the shoulders, and she was about 6 feet long from the tip of her snout to the tip of her tail. So she was a refrigerator size and weight, for that matter. You know, maybe not quite as wide as a fridge. But, you know, she was a substantial animal. But I mean, that aside, the thing with Esther that was so incredible, and I know it's a problem, not a problem, you know, but an issue that's dealt with in the pet pig world all the time, is people, A, don't know how to take care of them, and B, you have no idea how intelligent they are. And having a pig in the house was like child-proofing for a 400 or 500 pound toddler. So not only do you need to lock that cupboard where you keep your snacks and keep your treats, but you need to lock it with a padlock that can keep 500 pounds worth of animal out of it. It was unbelievable. And I mean, the learning curve that we had was incredible. You know, it was unbelievably challenging. But, you know, Esther, again, was a unique case. Not very many people, I hope, we don't hear about it too often anyway, get kind of into these situations where they end up with a 600-pound pig in the house. But going to the most common, even pot-bellied pigs, right, that are often marketed as, quote, mini pigs, you know, grow to about 200, 250 pounds. And I don't think anybody, reasonably anyway, would agree that a 250-pound animal is mini. You know what I mean? It's confusing.
At the Sanctuary of Solid Rock, we have 2 mini pigs, and they are considered mini pigs.
Right.
And one is 250 pounds and the other is 360 pounds.
Correct, yes.
And why do they get rehomed so many times? People
Bizarre
buy
definition
them.
for mini,
They
right?
buy them, they adopt them, whatever, as a small mini pig.
Yep.
And then that mini pig gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And they can't keep them anymore inside or in their apartment or in their house. And then they rehome them, and this cycle continues to happen.
Absolutely.
So when we're teaching kids and we tell the kids, and I say this all the time to the kids, these are mini pigs, they look at me like I'm crazy. And I'm like, this is what a mini pig is. And they're like, no, I've seen pictures of mini pigs, and they're like this big. And I'm like, no, that's a baby pig. That's a baby pig. That's how they market the baby pigs. They say they're mini pigs and they're full grown and they're not going to get much bigger. And that's how they market them to people.
Absolutely.
And so people unknowingly buy them or adopt them, and then they're not equipped to take care of them.
That's right. And when you get them, when they are babies, I mean, Esther was also mini for about 4 or 5 days of her life, you know? And so, you know, it's easy to see how people get sucked into it. I mean, and it's undeniable for anybody that's ever met a piglet. They are the cutest, most adorable little things, you know, and they are beautiful when they grow to be much larger pigs. But, you know, they're a lot to handle, right? Size alone, like I said, their intelligence, it's a lot for people that aren't expecting it. It is nothing like raising a dog or living with a dog. Like I said, I honestly, and I'm not even joking, you know, it's like living with a toddler. They've got the intelligence of a toddler.
But a much bigger.
A much bigger, yeah,
Bigger
sometimes grumpier, you know, toddler, right? And they are mischievous. They can be even manipulative. You know, I remember when Esther was growing up, like she would steal snacks from our cupboard. And I tell the story all the time because it was the kind of the light bulb for me where I realized how different it is living with a pig in particular, right? And so it was the food. We had food in one of the lower cupboards. And so we knew that she had figured out how to open the doors, but we weren't at that part in our piggy proofing stage where we had started adding cupboard locks. So she would go to the cupboard and she would open the cupboard really quietly. And then she'd come back to the living room and look at us and see what we were doing. And then she'd go back to the cupboard and pull out what she wanted, but she'd leave it on the floor very, very carefully. You know, she broke it into stages so she wouldn't get caught. And it was the third trip into the kitchen to get this food that she would grab what she wanted, and then she would just haul ass down the hallway to eat whatever she had stolen, right? But she was so clever that she would break it into steps. Rather than just going in, pulling it out, and causing chaos in the kitchen, she knew she'd get caught. She wouldn't get what she wanted. But by breaking into steps, she almost always at least got some of it before we were able to catch up with her and get it away from her. So their intelligence, I cannot overstate how incredible it was. It was mind-boggling. You know, some of these times you couldn't help but laugh, even though you were frustrated, because it was just so amazing, you know, to watch it. But yeah, people are not prepared. And I know there's a stat out there that says 9 out of 10 pigs, you know, do not stay with the original family that adopts them. You know, the people are so underprepared or not expecting it, or, you know, town ordinances. That was another thing that we came into. You know, it's, again, not like a dog. You have to have certain bylaws in place to even be allowed to have them in town. That was one of the things that prompted us to move, was the fact that we had an ordinance against having pot-bellied pigs. So there are so many reasons that people, get them and end up not being able to keep them. And then again, sanctuaries are required. It's all this big, huge circle. You know what I mean? That had we known about sanctuaries, had we visited a sanctuary, we might have been better prepared. We might have been, prompted with these, potential concerns and been able to address them or made different decisions before we put ourselves into a situation that ultimately it's the pigs that end up suffering for it. Trying to find them a home, trying to find them, somewhere safe to go can be a big challenge.
Yeah. How did your experience with Esther change your views on animal advocacy and welfare?
I don't even know where to start because quite literally every aspect of my life was changed from getting to know her. So it started with what's probably obvious, was, you're not going to eat pork anymore, right? But I have to admit, friends told me that. They said that to me. Oh, Jenkins, you'll never be able to eat bacon again now that you have a pig. And I was like, oh, don't be silly. She's a mini pig, different kind of pig. Like I had that kind of a wall up just to give you a better indication of the kind of person I was before she came into my life. I had no intention of ever becoming a vegan and had somebody approached me before I met Esther and said, hey, I'd like to discuss veganism with you. The misconceptions that I had in my mind about what that meant, you know what I mean? I would cross the road to avoid that conversation. Then Esther comes into my life. And like I said, it starts with pork, right? The minute I went to the vet and he said, oh, Steve, I don't think this is a mini pig. I'm pretty sure this is a regular commercial pig that you have on your hands. And the only reason he thought that was because her tail was cropped, right? And so that was kind of my first foray into the world of animal agriculture. Well, why do they cut their tails? So I went down that road, starting to figure that out. And it was one of those situations that it's like once you open, it's like Pandora's box, right? You open this box and you start going down that rabbit hole. And the more I learned about pigs and, the animal agriculture industry and pigs and how they're treated, it became less of a, well, maybe I shouldn't eat pork. Oh my God, how could I ever participate in that?
You can't
again?
unlearn.
No, you can't. And you can't unsee and you can't unhear and all of these things. And so that snowballed, it just became, it went from there to, well, why is it okay to do it to cows and why is it okay to do it to turkeys and chickens? And, so it started with her and then it just snowballed. And the last thing for me was dairy. The last thing that I gave up was dairy because even right to the end of that whole road, I'm like, well, they're not hurting the cows, to take their milk. And again, it's one of those things that the more you learn, the more you actually go looking for the information, which is all out there. It all existed. Like I said, I was that person. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear that.
What is
message.
the term for that? Isn't it like cognitive dissonance?
Cognitive dissonance. Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. So I was always that person since I was a kid. Like I said, always an animal lover, but I was also, I'd cover my eyes if one of those trucks, drove past on the highway, not think twice about getting off at the next exit to get a burger, out of sight, out of mind, right? Didn't want to know, didn't care to know. And it allowed me to keep doing what I was doing. But like I said, once I knew, I couldn't help it. I couldn't help but change. And so then it became a matter of, well, if someone like me can change, right? The last person you would expect, a burger is not a burger if it didn't have bacon on it. That kind of person can change simply by getting to know her, right? It was getting to know her that made me want to go looking for more information. And if I could do that, and if that could change me and have such a profound impact on my life, we thought that maybe that could work for other people. And that's why our approach to advocacy became what it was. It wasn't about trying to jam the message down somebody's throat. It was about planting that seed. It was about people realizing, who she was as an individual, which is, how we saw her. She was part of the family. It didn't matter that she happened to be a pig, and that's what her life should have been. Seeing her in that environment, seeing her as part of the family, just kind of changed her whole impression. It was her that came to mind, right? When you went to order that bacon sandwich, right? It was just like, oh, Esther. And, we heard messages right in the early days, as soon as we started the page, which was only meant to be for family, by the way. It was never intended to be what it became. It was just meant to be for friends and family because of the ordinances. Again, it's all full circle, right? Not supposed to have her where we had her. So we started this page so we could detach her from us, but still show friends and family what it was like living with her. They knew the story, but we weren't posting pictures. We kept her very secret. And so we had her for, almost 2 years before we even started the Facebook page. Kind of grew up with her, privately. We went through that storm on our own and figured it out and came out the other end. And that's when we started the page. And within a few weeks, we got a couple of messages from people. I remember one in particular. It was an elderly couple in their late 70s. And this woman wrote to tell us that she had been at the grocery store. Her husband went to pick up his bacon, loved his bacon, picked it up and put it back down. So I get upset. That gets me emotional. But he put it back down, and his response was, she noticed, but she looked at him, and he said, Esther, right? That was his,
Yeah.
that was it, But at that point in their life, I don't think they owed anybody anything, right? And to let her have that kind of an impact on somebody like that without saying a word is how we knew that it was the right approach for us. Getting to know her, being kind, being funny, making it relatable, and helping people get to know her the way that we know her. This seemed to be far more impactful than any other approach that I had ever come across. You know what I mean? And I'd seen it before. I'd seen advocacy before. I'd seen the PETA ads before. I'd seen all of that stuff before, and it never sunk in. A smile and a funny caption on a cute photo, right, got through to people that nothing else seemed to have worked until that point, And there is a place, there is a need for all of these different kinds of advocacy. I went looking for that information when she gave me a reason to, right? But it wasn't step one. I didn't dive right into that, right? Step one was planting that seed, making people, feel comfortable and relate to something is to me a far more effective approach than yelling or getting angry or trying to force an opinion or a viewpoint down somebody's throat. And so that became my mission in life, was to fill that void and to be that step that made people want to know more and made people want to see a little bit more about pigs. And it also became, even more than that, it became a place for people to go on, on a bad day. They would start their day coming to see your posts, right?
That was me.
Right? See, exactly,
I love
right?
seeing your posts every day.
Already a vegan, right? Already somebody that knew the things that we knew, and she became part of people's lives in the most amazing ways, right? And became an important part of people's lives in a really amazing way. And it was simply by being kind to people, and answering comments in a kind and supportive and encouraging way. When people wrote through and said, "Oh, Esther, I'll never eat bacon again," right? Rather than saying, well, what about cows? What about chickens? What about everything else? It was like, oh, hey, thanks. That's amazing. That's great news. And, we started a recipe page and it was called Esther's Kitchen, or is called Esther's Kitchen, but we didn't use the word vegan. We would use Esther approved, right? Because again, I kept coming back to my mind, and I'm like, well, I had this vision in my mind when I heard the word vegan, right? And again,
as do many people.
That's what, yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
And it's such an interesting thing, because when you're talking to vegans, sometimes they get angry. They're like, well, you don't use the term. And I'm like, well, we're not using it for you. I'm like, you get it, right? We're trying to get through to the people that don't, right? The people that were like me, that had you said, well, I want to discuss vegan wisdom with you. I would be like, well, go choose your sunflower seeds somewhere else, and I'm gonna, go do my own thing, right? And so those are the people to me that became the target audience for the Esther mission, right? Was the people that we couldn't reach using that term, but we'd used Esther approved, and it felt much more approachable. And again, it was just about handling people in a kind and supportive and encouraging way, to help kind of gently guide them down the path, rather than giving them a swift kick in the ass and forcing them in the direction that you wanted them to go. So kindness and encouragement and being supportive became, fundamental aspects of how we approached everything that Esther the Wonder Pig does and did.
Yeah, you have always done a phenomenal job with that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
At Solid Rock Community School, we actually have an animal sanctuary on campus called Sanctuary at Solid Rock. How important do you think it is to include animal experiences with students?
For one, I think it's the coolest sort of model and approach to this sort of thing that I've ever come across. I absolutely love it. And the thought of being at a school or going to a school that had a program like that is mind-boggling to me, especially when the objective is to help people understand the importance of kindness and compassion and how all of these things are connected. It was the other thing that I learned when we got to know Esther, was how far-reaching the decisions that we make on a daily basis are, right? And starting with animals, and if we can't be kind to animals, I mean, what hope do we have of being kind to each other? You know what I mean? And I feel like it's also such an amazing way to make a lot of the things that we're learning about on a daily basis that much more relatable, whether it come to geography and where the animals are from, ecology and the environment that they live in, or the environment and the impacts of animal agriculture on the environment. I feel like it's such an interesting segue into so many different topics that we're learning about anyway. That, like I said, with Esther, the whole point was making it relatable, making it something that people wanted to learn about and wanted to understand. And so using that as your entrance to go down those roads, I think is absolutely brilliant.
Students having experiences with animals is so interesting because you'll see students who maybe you don't always think are the nicest students in the world. And then you see them with an animal.
Yeah.
And they're beautiful.
There's something
and
magic
you see
about
this
it.
whole other side to them.
Yeah.
And then it really opens things up to be able to communicate with this child.
Yeah.
Then we'll see students who maybe don't really talk very much. And then all of a sudden you bring an animal into the room or into the picture and they totally light up and change.
Yeah.
It's such an amazing thing to witness.
Yeah, and it's a really hard feeling to explain, right? I mean, it's there's just something about animals in general, you know what I mean, that I feel bring out this side of us in the most amazing way. I don't know, like I said, I really don't know how to explain it. Like with Esther, I felt this unbelievable protective nurturing thing, the same as Phil, my dog Phil, right? I mean, I don't know, maybe that's part of it, right? Is their innocence and their vulnerability, right? That it brings out that need to take care of them, when you meet them, and it brings out a little bit of a softer side of you, and it brings out this little bit of a, I think some of us come from situations where maybe we have to put forward a little bit of a harder edge, because of the environment that we come from, right? And then dealing with animals and being able to spend your time with animals helps you kind of reconnect with that softer, more nurturing and protective side. And I don't know, it'd be an interesting thing to study, because I really do. I feel like animals bring out this side of us that can be hidden. The world is a pretty hard place.
In many cases, it brings out the best of us.
It does. It absolutely it does, right? It brings out that kind and compassionate and nurturing and supportive side of us that, like I said, some of us have to hide for one reason or another. The world in general is a really rough, challenging place to be, right? And getting away, and I know going on the sanctuary, people used to tell us all the time coming to visit the sanctuary that it was their happy place, right? It was a break from the real world. Right?
That's how I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, some of us feel it when we get home at the end of the day and take our dogs for a walk, or going to volunteer at a sanctuary, or taking care of an orphan baby animal. It kind of takes us away
therapeutic.
From every day. 100%. Yeah, 100%. And I feel starting that early with kids is so incredibly valuable, and it's an experience that some people may never have if it weren't for programs like this. I mean, I don't know too many people, but I do know some people that have never had an animal or pets in their home. And so I feel like, having that opportunity from an early age is invaluable in so many ways. Yeah.
Right. And most schools are not going to be in a position where they're going to start an animal sanctuary and rescue. That's not sustainable or possible for most schools, right?
Sure.
But they certainly can take a field trip to a sanctuary or take a field trip to a rescue. Those are things that are wonderful to do.
Absolutely.
And so much better than taking a field trip to the pet shop or the zoo, right? We want to take them to the rescues and the sanctuaries so they can really learn about the animals and have a different, more, I would say, organic and educational experience.
Absolutely. Well, and I feel like in sanctuary environments, you get to see the real animal. Do you know what I mean? The personality. You get to see these animals that are at ease, that are in their element, that are treated in a way that allows them to be themselves, and for you to see their personality and see, to really, really get to know them. I think that's a kind of an important, consideration as well. They're not just, penned up or in little crates or, in little tanks, right? They're able to be out doing their thing, being themselves. That's where you really get to see them shine.
Yes, because I will see school teachers and school administrators post in different Facebook groups that I'm in, things like, I'm going to get a hedgehog for my classroom, and they'll start putting things down. And my immediate response to that, and I always respond, is absolutely do not do that. A hedgehog is not an appropriate classroom pet, and animals shouldn't be put into that situation. So I'm not advocating for that at all.
No.
So yeah,
But
and I know that you know. I just want to make sure anyone listening is knowing, because animals, there's so much care and consideration that has to be given to them. And a school environment is actually not appropriate for almost any animal. And that's something that's very important to understand. We actually have a sanctuary where it's a whole different thing, and anybody can look that up and check that out. But I really want people to be understanding of that, because teachers, they're just regular people, and they want to have a classroom pet too, and they think it's cool and it'll be fun for the students. But what we don't want to teach students is that it's okay for animals to be living in little cages and tanks and things of that nature. We want them to learn the appropriate ways to take care of animals.
Absolutely.
And I really suggest, if there are any teachers or educators listening to this and you're thinking of having a classroom pet, please change your mind on that.
Absolutely.
That's really what I would like to say. I really would like to steer people away from that, because there are very few situations that's acceptable, or there are very few animals that can thrive in that environment. So there is just so much research that needs to be done before anybody would put an animal in that type of situation.
And you know what's interesting, though, I find, is that, again, it's a knowledge thing, and it's an information thing, right? Because people are doing these things with nothing but the best intentions.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? They're doing it for what they think are all the right reasons. And the same way people get a pet pig, or they bring a pet into a classroom, or they visit these, places that they maybe shouldn't be visiting, where animals are not treated as well as we would like them to. Nobody's doing it because they want to cause harm, or they want to do wrong. It's simply a lack of education.
It's education.
And a lack of information, right?
And that's what I'm all about, you're all about. We want to raise awareness. We want to bring education, because you can't change what you don't know.
No.
I say that all the time. And you can't unknow what you learn.
Exactly.
You've heard me say that many times.
100%.
Right? So people have to understand, they get their education from commercials and television shows, and that's not real.
From
it's
people
not
who have
true.
a vested interest in making sure you get the message they want you to get. Right.
Or they go to the pet store. Oh, my goodness, never take the information from the pet store.
No. No. So it's wild.
Yeah, so when they get the right information, so many people actually will change their mind. I was at the veterinarian with a hedgehog that we have, and it had to go to the vet because exotic animals do.
Yes, they do,
and it's hard to find vets that will take care of them, and they're very expensive. But we had 2 of the hedgehogs there, actually. And as I was checking out, a father that was there with his little daughter said to me, "Oh, do you have hedgehogs there? Can we look at them?" And I said, "You cannot look at this one because he just wants to murder people," which is really true. That is what his
I love animals
daily
with
desire
attitude.
is.
I love it.
He hates people, which most hedgehogs do. I said, "But you can look at her." And so they looked at her, and he said, "Oh, I'm so excited to see them. My daughter has been wanting a hedgehog for so long, and I was going to get her one this year for her birthday." And I said, "Oh, please don't get her a hedgehog." And I started to tell him just facts about hedgehogs, about how they're nocturnal, and how they have to have a heating source on all the time. And I'm just giving him information. And then he looked at me and he said, "Thank God I just talked to you. I am not getting her a hedgehog."
Right.
He's like, "Maybe a kitten."
Yeah.
And I said, "Great, and go to a rescue and get a kitten from there. That would be fantastic."
Yeah, absolutely. Knowledge is power, right? And allows us to make better decisions, right? The more we know. And again, that kind of brings us back again to having the sanctuary at the school, right? I love that we're able to start that and start planting those seeds and start, providing that information and knowledge at a much earlier age. I think that's amazing.
Okay, everyone, that is all the time we have for this episode, but keep an eye out for part 2. The Plant the Change podcast explores how education drives societal transformation, nurturing compassionate and responsible citizens, and plants the seeds of change for a better tomorrow. At Solid Rock, Florida, we're a nonprofit committed to compassionate, humane education, an approach that blends academic excellence, ethical responsibility, and emotional growth. We're doing something unique, and we need your support to expand our impact and strengthen our efforts to create lasting change. Visit solidrockflorida.org and click the donate button at the top of the page to see our current initiatives. You choose where your contribution goes, and every tax-deductible donation, no matter the amount, is greatly appreciated. Show your support and stay updated on future episodes and initiatives by following Plant the Change on YouTube and Solid Rock on Facebook and Instagram, at Solid Rock Community School, and at Sanctuary at Solid Rock. Together, we can redefine the future of education and create a world that's guided by compassion and ethical responsibility. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep making a difference.